I am Dr. Ray Dykes, and this is the Personal Faith Program. And this is a series of podcasts on personal faith with a passion, how to know what you really believe. This section of podcasts, this next two parts of podcasts are about sorting through old straw for spiritual messages from your past. Now, remember the formula. It takes your clay, your own personal experiences, mixed with religious information, which is straw, to make belief bricks with which you build your spiritual house of faith. Okay, so spiritual messages from your past began as straw, but that was so long ago it may have become clay. It's in the unconscious because you have forgotten it. It came into your brain consciously, it's become unconscious. You heard it repeatedly and it stuck in there somewhere, but never was processed. Now it's time to sort through these religious messages and decide whether to work with them to find meaning or to throw this straw as far away as possible. Religious information infiltrates our minds from a great many sources, and much of what you learn about faith is forgotten. But much of this forgotten information can continue to inform your unconscious faith. There may be a large reservoir of information that drives you to believe what you believe without knowing why you believe it. Many people express their faith with memorized words, not knowing what the words mean. In the first section of this series of podcasts, you involved yourself in theotherapy, digging into your experiences for glimpses of God in people, nature, and life events, stories, and in prayer. I hope you remembered experiences and those mental pictures of critical moments in your life that will be helpful as you make belief bricks using this clay of experience to mix with the straw religious knowledge you will be encountering in the next sections. These two podcasts, this is a transition section illustrating that there's a gray area here. It's not always possible to distinguish between clay experience and straw religious information, but usually it is clear. The litmus test is this. Clay is experience that is unprocessed and residing in the unconscious. Straw is religious information that comes into your consciousness. There are many sources from which you receive religious information. In this podcast, you'll be dealing with two prime examples, this and the next podcast, of religious information that you receive mentally and may have forgotten, repressed, or let sit so long that you're no longer aware that they're there. Religious teachings and words of hymns, psalms, and spiritual songs. The question is how much authority you have given them in your faith. So this podcast is about who told you that. Who told you that? Even if you never went to a seminary, divinity school, or graduate school of theology where clergy are trained, you're also probably taught what to believe about religious matters. Somebody gave you the words you use to express what you are supposed to believe. Sometimes you forget who told you what to believe, and you may not have sufficiently considered the source. That can get you in a world of hurt. Or you may have received words of wisdom that you need to recall to consciousness to use in the brick making process. That may bless your life. The subject is religious information. And the question is whether there are big chunks of this information in your brain that you've never fully or really evaluated. The purpose of this podcast is to encourage you to dig out this straw that has turned into clay. It's gone from conscious to unconscious, and to determine whether this information meshes with your life experience. It's your experience and only your experience that can validate this information. Martha and Jim came to see me for family counseling. This was Martha's second marriage. Martha had been married when she was 19 to a man who was physically abusive. After 5 years of beatings, she declared her freedom and got a divorce. That was a major problem for her, since she and her family were members of the Church of Christ, a fundamentalist alliance of churches that do not countenance divorce unless your spouse is adulterous. A few years after divorcing her first husband, she and Jim were happily married and living away from her home church. They had 2 children and a wonderful home life. Then members of the church and members of her family showed up to tell Martha that she was an adulteress, according to the New Testament, living in sin. They crushed on her that if she died tonight, her immortal soul would live all eternity in the depths of hell. Their solution to her problem was for her to annul her marriage to Jim, let him keep the children, go back to her first husband, and submit to his abuse for the rest of her mortal existence. Even after our counseling session, that's precisely what she did, because Martha didn't know what she believed. She simply accepted what others told her without examining what she believed, especially with regard to her own concepts of self-worth, God, and family. If she had built her own faith, she may have chosen love and life. Who were your most important theology professors? There's a very good chance that your parents told you most of what you believe. There's an even better chance that it was your mother who taught you religious matters in your home, since women are involved in Christian education more than men by a 2-to-1 margin. Can you remember the situations in which your mother or father spoke to you of his or her faith or values or spiritual hope? Can you remember the general topics presented or the specific words used? What authority do these words still have for you? Grandparents are often surrogates for parents in religious education of children. Sometimes they impart spiritual wisdom to their grandchildren more readily and more easily than the children's parents. Lessons of faith are regularly taught to children sitting on a grandparent's knee. Do you remember sage words of spiritual advice from your grandparents? Sunday school teachers may have been important sources of information for you if you grew up in the church. Beginning with preschool class, you probably were taught about the people of the Bible, beginning with Jesus, and then Peter, Paul, and Mary, and then Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Ruth, David, Esther, and a few others. In elementary class, you would have been taught the stories of the Bible, like the creation of the world, the great flood, the Israelite exodus from Egypt, the conquest of Canaan, the birth of Jesus, death and resurrection of Jesus. And in junior high class, you might have been asked to consider biblical concepts such as sin, justice, love, salvation, heaven and hell, and morality. In senior high class, the subject was the application of biblical principles to daily life in your society. Now, that's a typical structure of Sunday school curriculum in many Christian churches and denominations. If you attended Sunday school, what have you forgotten that you were taught about all this? Who are notable teachers? You may have been influenced by church creeds, confessions, and catechisms as sources of your unconscious faith. During my years as pastor of Presbyterian churches, I found that many Presbyterian laypersons relied upon the Apostles' Creed for the words of their expression of faith. The Apostles' Creed was originally a baptismal creed to be recited by an adolescent or adult at the time of his or her baptism. It was conceived as a personal expression of faith, its recitation necessary to permit one to be baptized. It was written in part to refute the belief of a group of early Christians called the Docetics, who maintained that Jesus only appeared to die. So the Apostles' Creed says 4 ways that Jesus really died physically. He was crucified, dead, and buried. He descended into hell. Most Christians don't know that he descended into hell means that Jesus really died, since the hell referred to here is the place where all dead people go after they die, the underworld under the flat earth. If you grew up in a creedal church like Presbyterian, Catholic, Episcopal, Methodist, Lutheran, you were probably exposed to the Apostles' Creed. But have you ever really thought seriously about the words and concepts in it? Now is the time to dig out a copy and consider the words carefully. The Nicene Creed was the first creed written to be recited by congregations gathered in worship. It was written in 325 in a town of Nicaea in northwestern Turkey by a group of Christian bishops called together by the emperor of the Roman Empire, Constantine, to settle the dispute over the nature of Jesus, who and what Jesus was and is, and how Jesus relates to God. The resulting creed was more political than it was theological. Constantine had seen the fussing and fighting taking place among these early Christians about the nature of Jesus, and he demanded a compromise expression of faith on which all Christians could agree. The last section of the creed, of the Nicene Creed, on Holy Spirit, and it wasn't finished until 70 years later at the Council of Constantinople. It was left unfinished in 325 because the bishops ran out of time. When it was finished, it was not agreed to by all Christians for centuries, and later became one of the principal reasons for the division between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. Again, if you grew up in the church, the Nicene Creed and other creeds may have had a great influence on your unconscious faith. These words and concepts need to be examined to see if their imprint has been stamped on your brain with helpful or hurtful results. Is it important to you to know some of the history of the formation and original intent of the creeds to see what you may have picked up unwittingly along the way? For church people, the most powerful source of unconscious faith is the sermons preached Sunday after Sunday. They may have been about the love of God or the wrath of God. They may have been about the goodness of God's creation or the wickedness of the devil's domain. They may have made you leave worship feeling fear and guilt or renewal and refreshment. They put many thoughts into your head at the time, some of which have influenced you positively and some negatively, even though you've never processed these thoughts. It was Jonathan Edwards who ignited the great revival in the original colonies of the young United States of America with his sermon entitled Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. The sermon contained a vivid word picture of a spider dangling on a silken thread above a roaring fire, symbolizing an individual in peril of falling into the depths of hell. This one sermon had a powerful impact on early American Christianity and all those who heard it. Sermons still have an impact consciously and unconsciously. Who were the most important preachers in your past? Can you name one or more? What did they say to you about important matters of faith that you remember? What have you repressed into your unconscious? Chances are, when you make an important faith statement, it was a preacher who told you that. Some other important theological professors in your life could have been school teachers if you attended a parochial school or a private Christian school. If you took a course or courses in religion or philosophy in college, the professor may have told you that. Some of the words of faith you profess to believe may have reached your intellect through authors of books on spiritual matters. For example, Hermann Hesse in the book Siddhartha and Erich Fromm in the book The Art of Loving wrote words that were pivotal in my faith life years ago. An important question to ask yourself about any and all of your theological professors is whether they were helping you explore your own spirituality or trying to indoctrinate you. It seems that the world is full of those who, for their own personal reasons, are bent on indoctrination. What you're told by your theological professors may help you or it may hurt you. The important thing is to decide for yourself what you want in your faith and what you choose not to believe. Look carefully at this straw that has turned to clay and choose well. Somebody taught me a long time ago that when you're having a theological debate with somebody and you're losing, two phrases to remember are, what do you mean by that? And who told you that? You'll slow them down anyway. See you next time.